water? This might seem like such a basic question, but it's something that often I don't think that we really think about. And then our general understanding we get from science and from school really doesn't adequately explain what water is and how it's used by our body, how we interact with it, and the real significance of it. So before we get into the bioenergetics of water and its amazing ability to store information, communicate information, and act as a battery in our body and connect us really with the world around us, let's review basically how we hydrate and why we need water at the biochemistry physical level of our body. So I do have another video that's under the Mind Over MS podcast about hydration. So anybody that's looking for more detailed information, you can find it there. But otherwise, I'm just going to give a high overview right now. They say on average 8 cups of water per 100 pounds, but I don't really believe that we have to follow this as a steadfast rule because it is possible to drink a lot of water and still be chronically dehydrated at the cellular level because we're not absorbing and integrating at the interstitial fluid level. So, but you still want to be drinking probably more water because a lot of us are dehydrated, and definitely drinking water as opposed to juice or definitely then pop or any sugary drinks. Caffeine is also dehydrating. So even though it does count as fluid into your body, it's a diuretic. So it does cause you to flush water out more. So you'd want to compensate for that. And then also we just thinking about other factors like how often are we exercising and what kind of climate do we live in? Is it a summertime? Are we, playing tennis outside, or, are we just sitting around inside of the house in the winter? We're not going to be going through as much water. And then when you're drinking water, we also want to be thinking about the quality of the water we're drinking. I would never drink the tap water in my neighborhood. We have a high iron level, and you can see the sludge of that like formulating on the toilets, any of the sinks in the house, definitely on the filters of my Alexa Pure, which is similar to a Berkey. You can see that orange sludge on it. I wouldn't want all of that metal and iron in my body. Now, they also put fluoride in the water, right? And that is going to lower IQ. It calcifies our pineal gland. There's so many reasons we don't want all of that fluoride inside of our body. It is a neurotoxin. So you do want to filter your water. I do 2 things. I have just like a gravity, like I said, an Alexa Pure. I find though for my house and the family and the amount of animals in it, it doesn't really generate enough water in a day to do all of our needs. So that is kind of like what I use to just for the drinking water when I fill my cup. But otherwise, I have a distiller. And the distiller now is going to take out, just like a reverse osmosis, it takes out all of the pollutants, and that's great, but it takes out all the minerals and all the nutrients that are in the water too. Now, I find that that's okay for me because I use a little bit of Celtic salt. You can also try Himalayan pink salt. Just make sure the source you have is good. And I just dissolve a little bit of that on my tongue every time I pour water. But I like to use the distiller for cooking. And then I also like to use it for when I put it in my Keurig machine because it doesn't have any hard water anymore. So it doesn't get all that calcified white on all of the filters. So that's what I do anyway, but whatever you can do in your house, just keep in mind that if you have like a Brita filter or any of these just like fridge carbon filters, they don't really take out most of the stuff in there. And they have been finding now that there's even like drug residue, birth control, cocaine, different kinds of like antipsychotics. Like when they're testing the water, these things are making it into our bodies. So that counts. And then also not trying to drink out of a plastic bottle. Obviously, if you're going to drink out of a container, have it be glass or metal, or at least the hard plastics that are apparently safer. I say avoid plastic if you can. So that's just some of the basics then, just on like hydrating your own body. If you want more detail, you go back and watch my video. It's under Mind Over MS podcast. But otherwise, let's just think about water in a broader sense. I personally think the more I learn about water, the more I think it's magic. And I mean, even if you go back, it's kind of beyond the scope of this today. But when you look at the old cathedrals and churches and buildings, they really are like first of all, they always had water in fountains as like a type of aquifer, but all of those geometric shapes that are in the glass structures in the cathedral vaulted ceilings, they are like a resonance for the water. So it is like if you were playing a frequency inside of those buildings, you would be structuring the water for healing. And I believe our ancestors knew these things, but over time, for whatever reason, whether it was like civilizations fell or whether it was something suppressing this information, a lot of the knowledge we used to have has been lost. But really, honestly, I find it's all resurfacing again now. And even the more I learn about it, I'm not sure if this is just kind of like, the laws of attraction, but the more I've learned about it and the more I've researched about it, the more information I keep finding. Now, whether that's because, magnetically, as I think about something, I'm attracting more of that to me, or whether it's like a collective consciousness that all of society is kind of raising its frequency at the same time. And I've got to think of the name of the scientists that did it, that proved that if you taught rats something in London, that the ones in New York knew it too, because there was a rat consciousness. Maybe human consciousness is kind of rising again, and we're all refiguring out things that we forgot before. And it's amazing because it feels so intuitive when you hear it and all of a sudden someone explains it and you're like, oh my goodness, that makes so much sense to me, more than the ways I used to think of it. So now let's go back to the bioenergetics of water. So water, okay, who will I talk about first? Let's talk about Dr. Emoto first. So this is a Japanese scientist who started looking at water and then playing frequencies to it. So he would play frequencies. If anyone knows cymatics, where if you put like beads down on like a surface and you play music underneath, it creates like these patterns depending on what kind of music you play to it. It was the same idea, but he was using water instead. And the idea was water able to hold memory? And he absolutely proved that it could do that, because when they would play music to water, and then they would then freeze the water, and then they would look at the patterns that the water made. And I suggest any of you after this, maybe you want to look up another YouTube video about his experiment. I have a book by him and it's beautiful. So the geometric shapes that were made when it was like playing classical music or music that had like a lot of structure and harmony in it, it would form these beautiful crystalline structures that were absolutely symmetrical. And they almost look like mandalas, almost like really intricate and beautiful. And then if they played heavy metal to it, it was very disrupted and it was very chaotic. And that would be expected. Now, in a side note on this, I just heard something recently about what kind of music is the most healing for everybody. And apparently cats like classical, and humans did best with whatever music they like. So maybe even though the water didn't like heavy metal, I'm not saying that that if you really love heavy metal music, it might in some way do something for you just because of the love and the intention and the fact that you really liked it. Maybe that positive emotion inside of you also does something therapeutic. So I'm not even crapping on all styles of music here, because I think based on that study I just mentioned, if you really like the music, it's probably therapeutic to you. The part that I found pretty funny is that dogs apparently like reggae. And I think that that's suiting to some of the dogs I have in the past when I think of their personalities. But that had to do with the fact that the heartbeat of the dog paired very well with the heartbeat of the reggae. So again, we're not looking now at the music style per se, we're looking at the feeling that it generated. So Emoto went on to look at, beyond just playing music to the water, what about if you just spoke to the water? So he would say like either beautiful words like love and peace, things of gratitude, or he would say hateful words to the water and then do the same thing. And in this case, we also found that that the words mattered. And again, the things on the high vibrational frequencies made beautiful symmetric patterns. And then as expected, on the low end frequency of fear and hate, resentment, and all of these types of things, it created disharmony. So what is really relevant now to human health is when we think about that our body is almost all water. So I know when you're in school, they tell you, okay, your body's approximately 70% water, depending, like some parts, your brain might be more water, muscle, maybe, ligaments less, I'm not saying which ones are which, but roughly 70%, which also corresponds to the world as well, right? With 70% approximately being water and the rest land. But when you look down at the cellular level and you get smaller and smaller and smaller, actually it's more like 99.9% is of the molecules is going to be actually the H2O. And that's because that is attaching to other molecules and atoms and then turning into a different structure. But at the base of all of those other structures was actually breaking down to it being water as well. So pretty much we're almost entirely water, and then the rest is space. So space occupies in our body, if you think about the atoms and them vibrating at these different frequencies, that 99.99999, a whole bunch of nines, is empty space. But of that 0.0000001% that is matter, 99.99999% is water. So pretty much we're all just space and water, and all of it is just vibration. Like Tesla said, if you want to understand the universe, think in vibration, frequency, because that's all really that all of it is. It's just everything vibrating. So now going back to Emoto. So whether it was music or your voice, this is sound frequency, right? Because your voice is also resonating at a certain frequency, and there's intention also behind it. And so that frequency is what's impacting. So when we think about the mind and body connection, and our mind is, kind of instructing our body on what to do, it's telling it, whatever. Our body always listens to our mind. So if our mind is thinking negative thoughts all the time, that is putting that negative frequency into the water. And of course, then we're going to find that we have more disease, more disharmony, dysregulation in our body, whereas the opposite is going to be true. When we're thinking, and that's why they're showing like people that are more grateful and people that pray and people that have certain daily practices, meditation, any of these things tend to get more health benefits, is because we are having this positive frequency of harmony and communication within the body. So I can't think of the female's name. She's a scientist as well that started asking water questions. So you could look this up after, I'm sure, maybe even in the show notes, I'll try to look up her name and link it. But she started asking questions to water and then freezing it. And what was so cool about this is that the water would draw a picture. And so if she would just not even ask a question, but just say a word, right? Like gratitude. Now, gratitude, you don't have a universal picture or image for that, right? That's just, it depends on each of us thinking what that means to us. We would make an image for that in our mind when we think of that word. But when the water was asked, it did create images. And then when they took that image and they gave it to people in different languages and different age groups, so children and elderly people all in the spectrum, people universally were able to describe what that image was based on what the water created, which is really beautiful because that's a uniting force, where the water was like a universal language that united all of us, seeing as water is in all of us. And just like when we think of prana or chi, or when we breathe, how that's like really unites us as well too, and that's the space in our body, right? Is that is shared by everybody because we're sharing it with the trees, right? But in reverse, we're having this symbiotic relationship with them. And when I breathe, we're breathing the same air, right? And that air is filtering. Like air that might have been inside of you has now gone into a tree, and then it filters back, and now it comes back to me, and we're sharing it. And water is very much the same. The water is always moving in the world, and it's always cycling, in all of these phases and moving, up into the clouds and dropping back down, and in the rivers, and then to the ocean, and then back again. And the water is cycling. When we die, it cycles into another thing, just like energy and just like the air. It never really goes anywhere. It's just moving constantly. And as it's moving, what kind of information is being stored in it and what is being picked up in it? So before I move on to like the actual memory that the water can have, let's talk about how it would even get there. So this is another scientist that's currently doing work right now, Gerald Pollack. I believe he's at University of Washington. You can look up his stuff too, and this is just incredible as well. He is discovered that there's a fourth phase of water. And it's amazing to me that we're like trying to put people on the moon, and we're doing all these like telecommunications and advancements with AI, but we don't even understand water. And water is like such a basic thing in all of our lives. It's essential. So what he's discovered anyway is that there is like this fourth phase of water which happens inside of structures, whether it's plants, animals, humans. And he calls it easy water for exclusion zone, but really what it is, it's like a gel-like structured water. And this is why once it's in our body, if you were to cut yourself, you wouldn't just like spill out 70% water everywhere, because the water has now become structured both inside of your cell and outside of the cell and within the matrix of your body. And that provides communication. But how does it get charged? Okay, so what he figured out was if you took a hydrophilic substance, And when they studied this actually afterwards, the thing they found that was the most hydrophilic, so the thing that created most charge in our body, was ghee, which is, I think, why when you think about bullet coffee, and like I actually do that with my coffee, I put ghee into organic coffee and put it in my Ninja Bullet because it then structures the water better. But hydrophilic surface being something that loves water. So when you think of that, even when you drop a bead of water onto something like a Teflon, it stays like a drop. So that's hydrophobic. It doesn't want water, but hydrophilic kind of like takes the water and it sucks it in and likes it on the surface. So if you took a substance like that and you put it beside water, that the water would create like a magnetic field. So the negative ions would stay close to the surface of the hydrophilic surface, and the positive ones would push out to the side. But what was interesting about that is it took out all of the, particulate matter and the toxins, the pollutants with it. So in the positive side, it took, like when they put stuff in the water, they could see that those contaminants moved to the positive side, which in essence means that you could actually create clean drinking water without any electricity, without any filtration, as long as you were only taking water out of the negatively charged ions, which probably in your body is beneficial too, because we like to be slightly negative charged, which is why grounding is good for us, PEMF is good for us, and we don't get enough of that because of our artificial society that we live in now. So once they had this separated charge, that's what a battery is, right? Battery is positive and negative. So once you had that, you now have the negative charge slightly around each cell. And when you have also negative ions inside of the cell, then they kind of repel against each other. And as they move, the movement is what is creating like a heat source of energy. So you have all these little batteries in every single cell is now becoming a battery. So this is now why it's important to hydrate when we're talking before hydrating. And the reason you want to add the Celtic salt or the Himalayan salt in is because you need all of those trace minerals. And in Celtic salt, there's something like 97%. Himalayan is 80, mid 80s. And all of those, especially the four essential ones. So you want magnesium, calcium, potassium, and sodium, because you have ion pumps in every cell. And when you have the right amount of those nutrients in your body, you can now take the water from outside and bring it effectively plumping up your cells. And when they're plump, they're not sticky. You're not going to get the rouleau effect in your blood. They're going to have all the channels open to bring nutrients in and detox out. So your body is not only creating a battery, but it's efficiently working. And then when each one of those cells is charged, we all know what creates signals, right? Is charge, right? It's the wiring in your house. It is the telecommunication signals. It's this frequency having something to ride on, an electrical current to have the wave. So when your body is filled like a battery now because you've hydrated correctly and your cells got the right things it needs to hydrate. And now, and here again, just to say that the surface of your cell is made mostly of fat, which is the hydrophilic. So this is why it works really well, which is why you need things like the correct omegas in your body. You need DHEA to be working correct at nighttime to have fat metabolism at night. Like there's so many things that you need. It's not just hydration. It really is holistic. So I want you to keep that in mind. You can't probably get all of these benefits unless you're doing multiple things at one time for your health. This is just one cool thing about the water. So anyway, Pollock discovered this, and this is another reason why in one of the experiments they did, as they moved the two containers of water that had this battery charge, they had like water go across the top of it and form a bridge. And until it got to a certain weight, then it would collapse the water. But otherwise, the water actually formed a bridge from one side to the other, which is amazing. That's showing that there's some kind of charge holding that together. And one of the interesting things, I don't remember ever learning this in school about water, but water has a very high surface tension. I think the only thing that's more is mercury. So it means that if you put something heavier than the water, the tension on the surface of the water will still hold that heavier thing, which means the water is like working together, like it's communicating, it's holding some kind of structure together. And that's super cool because there's a lot of implications to that. And one of the things they did then was they got a tube out and they watched, once you had this charge of negative and positive, that the water would cycle through the tube. Now, what makes that interesting is for the effect in our body. So when we think about our circulation system, like lymph, and mostly we think about our blood because we have a pump of our heart and it pumps that blood all around. But in bioenergetics, we think about the heart not the same. It's not just a pump, because when a baby is born, It doesn't actually have the heart yet, and already the circulation system is moving blood around the body. Well, how is that? It's because of structured water. It's the easy water. Because there's this battery charge, there's already this filtration system happening. So your heart definitely does pump. I'm not disagreeing with that statement, but it might not be the only thing, right? Because your heart, when you think about it pumping, I mean, there's a lot of veins and arteries in your body, and they're pretty small, and they're almost only the size of an individual blood cell. So that would be very difficult for your heart to just pump that through. But in bioenergetics, we think about the heart as every time the heart beats, which each beat is unique. So there is always like the heart rate variability, just like a thumbprint. Each one in your lifetime is different. And it depends on, how you've slept and what you've eaten and what kind of thoughts you're thinking, which is why if you look at heart math, they do a lot of studies on the head and heart connection and how important that is. I actually have some meditation videos on heart coherence if you're interested in doing a meditation on it. But every time your heart beats, it is really what it's doing is whatever thoughts you're thinking are going into your body, and that heartbeat is imprinting the water. So and like the blood inside of you. So as it's imprinting the blood, it's moving out, and that blood is being circulated through all of the organs of your body, and they're getting the message of your heart, right? Which is emotions. It is the emotion. So it's like going back again to Emoto's study. It's not so much even about the music being played. It's like the intention behind it in the spoken word. It's like whatever you were thinking. And this now becomes really interesting because thoughts can be measured in mass as well too. Just like a spoken word becomes a thing once you speak it. It is an intention, and it's being put into the rest of your body and circulating all through it. So the fourth phase of water is really fascinating. It's really changing the way people are looking at it. And one of the ways in which I've further studied now into water is through infoceuticals. So I work for Energy for Life as a certified bioenergetic wellness coach. And we do scans which are all based on bioresonance in the body. So it's like using either your voice or a handheld scanner, and you're getting a signal back and forth into the body in real time as like a feedback mechanism. And it is saying out of all the mapped out points in your body, which we think of as like an ideal healthy range, which one of yours need priority because they're just not quite operating right. And that's affecting your energy in the body, which can over time translate into physical things and structural changes if not addressed, which is disease and dysregulation. So in infoceuticals, what they're doing then is like now that we've mapped out the body and we can see, okay, this is what a healthy, say, liver meridian looks like, and this is the frequency of fear and what it does in the brain. And once you know all of these things, we have that frequency and we know what it is now. So what is being done is you now take that frequency and you take a very large voltage, 10,000 volts, and you structure the water first. So you put the minerals that are required, like we talked about, for the pumps to work. So you're structuring the water, and you are putting ozone in it too, which that's a separate podcast because I do ozone therapy as well. And it's incredible, but it's a little bit outside of the scope of today. So we'll just say that they ozonate the water as well. And then they play really high voltage frequency into the water. And water does store memory, which we've seen in these experiments where they freeze the water, and whatever happened previously to the water is going to be stored in the memory of the water. And so once they put that in there, and I guess you can think of this kind of similar to the concepts of homeopathy, where you're taking a substance and you're diluting it until there's no measurable amount of that substance, but yet the water still holds the memory of the original thing that was there. The only difference with bioenergetics, like homeopathy is like and like. So you would take something that would activate the thing that you're trying to prevent, and because it's like an opposite effect in the body. With infoceuticals, it's different because you're actually giving corrective information into the body. So you're playing the frequency of a healthy thing that you want to achieve. You put that in the water, and as you drink that water, it's doing something called entrainment, which also I talk about in the PEMF videos. So entrainment is, you can think of that of like the tuning fork experiment, where if you have two tuning forks that are at the same note, if you hit one of them, the other one will start to vibrate because they resonate with each other. And then if you've ever seen the experiments where they use the metronomes, and if you start them all at different times, eventually they all synchronize together because entrainment is happening where things want to find order out of chaos. So it's the same thing in your body. Your body is constantly trying to reach homeostasis. It constantly wants to go back to health. If you just get out of the way and give it what it needs, sometimes it will do that. It's just that we keep over time disrupting it, ignoring our body. We do all these bad lifestyle choices, and then we're just affected by things we can't control, like EMF and glyphosate and the chemtrails and things they do to us that, it's hard to avoid it. But we can do a lot of things, and I hope you watch my other videos or even book a consultation with me so I can go over these things based on your particular scan and what you might need. But suffice to say that if you put these infoceuticals back into your body and it's corrective information, over time as you're taking it, it's entraining your frequency to go back to that of a healthy one so that your body will go back into balance, flow, and with a corrective information field. So it's actually going more from like, in traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic, they knew about the subtle body and they knew about the energetic pranamaya kosha. And they talk about all of these things, but it was more about like the flow, and that's beneficial too because you want to get the flow right. It was more about the flow of the energy, where infoceuticals is getting more into the field of quantum science, where you're now looking at not just is the flow and the strength of the energy good, but is the information correct? Because what information is riding on that meridian? So as it moves from one point to another, it's not just about is it getting there, is the flow open, is the strength strong, but what is being communicated? And that's why infoceuticals are so fascinating and they're so effective. And in my mind, really revolutionizing the way that we would do medicine because nothing that I ever heard of ever before. And I have been a patient for a long time because I have a chronic illness, which allopathic medicine has failed to understand or address in any meaningful way. But these infoceuticals have worked wonders for me. It was the two things. First, finding pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. That was a game changer for me. Turn the lights back on. It gave me enough energy in my body so that I could start to have time to address things like diet, lifestyle, exercise. Because before I was so sick, I didn't have enough energy to even start the things that were required to get back into balance. The PEMF gave me just, boom, tons of energy in the body. But I used that energy effectively. I used it to cook these organic meals and to make homemade bone broth, to make my own remedies, to train to be a yoga teacher. Like I use that energy effectively so that I don't have to do the PEMF on multiple times in a day anymore because my body is getting better at producing its own energy. But I still wasn't all the way better. And I think that's because of whether you want to say it's root canals or Epstein-Barr or emotional trauma, or I have a million things I could say might have caused me to become off of balance. The infoceuticals is doing that last little bit that I couldn't find help with anywhere else, which is putting the right information back in. So even though my cells had energy now and I'm doing good lifestyle, they're still pushing corrupted information. Right. And the fact that we live in a toxic world of EMF and, all these other things I just mentioned, it's very hard to entrain your cells back to health when all day long you're being bombarded by the incorrect signals. So the infoceuticals were a game changer for me, which is why I would invite you, anybody that's listening to this right now, whether you're very chronically ill and you need like immediate help, and I can do a lot of things for you, put you on an energy protocol, or whether you're just looking to optimize too, because no matter how good you think you feel with energy, there could always be things that start to get out of balance. And if you address them very soon in the course of them coming out of balance, it's very easy to get back on track and fix them. But when we ignore them and over time they start to accumulate, they do eventually turn into disease. And I can tell you from personal experience, it is much harder to recover than it is to maintain optimal health. So if you're already doing well, it is still beneficial to look at these things because we don't live in the world that our ancestors did, where as long as you were, sleeping right and eating right and doing things right, you'd be okay. We all live now where our feet are never barefoot. They're never touching the ground. We always have, we're not seeing the sun in the morning. Everything is artificial light and blue lights and so much media. Like we're bombarded by so much negativity and things in the world that are so outside of our control. And it's just nonstop flow of these things that we all need to get our energy balanced and to do it right. And I know that's a little off topic now because we're talking about water, but water really is a place to start. And one of the things I can do on your bioenergetic scan is I look at how you're dealing with hydration and how that's actually working in your body. And then I could give you, more individualized, specific things for your particular case on what we can do to get your energy back in balance. But for today, I'm going to leave that there because that was a lot of information. I really suggest that all of you go and look up Gerald Pollack and Dr. Emoto And then I wish I could give credit to the woman I'm thinking of that was talking to the water. I will try to find that and put it in the show notes because her work is really beautiful too. And it's been emulated by a lot of people now. So there's lots of people beyond her now that are doing this, but there was kind of an original woman that did it. But anyway, so go back and hydrate with a good healthy source and try to think about getting the fat balanced right in your body. I know they told us for years to avoid fats, but don't eat deep fried food and seed oils, but avocado oil and high quality cold pressed extra virgin olive oil. Like there are lots of things there. I know fish is a bit of a tricky one now because everything is so toxic in the oceans and overfished, but if you can get a good quality fish, I would suggest that as a source too. But and because all these things are actually going to help with creating this battery of water in the body. And then let's get the information right. So keep your mindset good, right? What you're thinking matters. So when you're even drinking a glass of water, say a little blessing over it, right? So have some intention, put some gratitude that you have this clean water, that you have this source, and think about what it's doing in your body and try to keep your mind positive. I know it's hard in the world. Lots of things shake us. And it's okay if you get off balance for a minute and somebody cuts you off or you get some bad news or something happens, but try to pull yourself back in again and think about all the things that you still have to be grateful for and all the things that are going well for you. Because over time, all of these things are going to add up and they're going to matter and they're going to start to really energize your body again and get you back on track. So I'm going to leave it off for there today. I hope that you got a lot of information out of this. So everybody have a blessed day and a blessed life. Namaste.